The technical instruction in this video covers retouching tools and techniques in Photoshop. Most people think of using retouching tools in Photoshop for removing blemishes or making people more attractive. But they can also be used to simplify and enhance a composition. Remember, Photoshop is a powerful application for manipulating pixel-based images. Nothing should be in a composition because you found it that way. It should be there because it's exactly what your composition needed. Go to File, Open. I'll pick number 1, Red Eye, and open it up. The Red Eye tool works pretty automatically and it removes red eye from photographs. If you go under here and choose the Red Eye tool, the little eyeball with the plus, it can work fairly automatically, although we might have to click a couple times. On the red eye, click. That's pretty good already. Click on the edges. Get as much of the red out as possible. So there we are. But I'll go ahead and close that and don't save. Now let's go to File, Open, and pick number 2, the Spot Healing Brush. So we have somebody with a blemish here, and in that same spot we want to pick the Spot Healing Brush, not the healing brush, but the Spot Healing Brush. And we can adjust the brush size. We want it kind of blurry. Hardness means blurriness, so this is not blurry at all. This is totally blurry. Let's put it somewhere in the middle. And let's increase the size. We want the size to be not too big, but a little bit bigger than the blemish. So I have it about 50. Okay? Now, we just click and drag over the blemish, and be careful not to drag over the lines on the face here, because you'll erase those. You see it does a pretty good job of automatically blending away the blemish. So the Spot Healing Brush works automatically as well. You can just click over something to get rid of it or drag over it, and again be careful not to drag over the facial elements or it'll get rid of those. And anytime something happens that you don't want, oh, I didn't mean to do that, Edit, Undo, or Command Z. Or retrace your steps in the History panel. So let's close that one. Don't save. Let's open. Number 3, Patch and Content Aware. So first we're going to talk about the Patch tool. So this is one of those compositional things. We want to get rid of these elements right here in the sand to make this a better composition and not detract from the figure, who has a nice triangular composition otherwise. So let's go to the Patch tool. And this works with any kind of selection tool also. You could make a selection first and then use the Patch tool, but we'll go ahead and use the Patch tool to make the selection as well. Make sure this says Source instead of Destination at the top. So I'm clicking and holding down, and I'm being careful not to go over the bathing suit on the figure. Just select the shadow and the other stuff here, the towels and shoes. And I've made a selection connected the beginning to the end. And if I drag over here, you can see that I'm replacing the contents in there with the contents over here. Now, normally you would look for a spot where it doesn't duplicate. You wouldn't want to pick a spot that's right next to it because you can see the same kind of sand dunes twice. So in real life, you'd probably want to do this more than once and add a little variety. But let's go ahead and do this. Just make sure you don't see a little corner of the towel like this. And then if you let go, Photoshop does its best to automatically blend the edges. So I'll hit Select, Deselect, and that already looks pretty good. And again, all of the tools I'm showing you work well together. So if you did the Patch tool and one edge looks kind of funny, then you could switch to the Spot Healing Brush and correct that edge, right? So that's one way of doing it. So let's go ahead and I'll retrace my steps in history all the way to the beginning by clicking up here. Click. So we have our unwanted element back again. So this time, let's use that polygonal lasso and make a similar selection. And I'll show you another tool that may or may not work. If you go to Edit, Fill, and choose Content Aware, it'll try to fill in that area. Let's see how it did. Also not bad. Then I think I would maybe use the patch tool and replace this dune that repeats 3 different times with a little bit of empty sand and see if that looks better. Looks okay. So the Content Aware tool works automatically, and it works best if you have a big textural element, like say a big wheat field with a tiny figure in front of it, and you want to get rid of the tiny figure. You can select the figure and say Content Aware Fill, and it does a pretty remarkable job of filling it in. You'll notice it'll either work or totally not work, so it's worth trying when you want to get rid of an element. Edit, Fill, Content Aware. So let's hit the X, don't save, and open. Number 4, clone. So we're going to use the clone stamp tool. This is a nice picture of an elephant, but the bar is in front of the trunk of the elephant, and that's detracting from the composition. So we're going to use the clone stamp to put the trunk in front of the bar. So I'm selecting the clone stamp tool, not the pattern stamp tool, but the clone stamp tool without the little checkerboards. And I would adjust the brush size. It's about the way I want it right now. And before we do anything, I'm going to go to the layers panel here, and I'm going to add a new layer, the little new symbol on all the panels. Create a new layer. If you leave your mouse over it, click, and I made a new blank layer. And I'm going to paint my clone stuff in the new layer. So that way, if I don't like it, I can just get rid of it by getting rid of the layer. So I'll use the polygonal lasso, and I'm going to make a little selection area here so that I can't paint outside of that area. I'm not going to get near here, so I don't need to worry about these edges. But I'll try to connect the beginning to the end. Make a little selection mask. So back to the clone stamp tool. And the rest of the exercises were pretty easy and automatic. This is one that might take a little practice. So we want to go up here, and we want to make sure also, by the way, that all layers is selected. Sample all layers. So if yours just says select current layer, which it might, select all layers instead, because we want to make sure we're cloning the stuff on the background layer but painting on the blank layer. So it's a 2-part process. I'll go up here and I'll hold down the Alt Option key, and it turns into a little target, and then I go click while holding down the Alt Option key, and I've sampled that area, and I'll paint with that area down here, the area that I've sampled with. So I'll just go ahead and paint here, and maybe I will do it again, hold Alt Option and sample over here, because I don't want this exact, I'm not painting yet, but I don't want this exact thing here to repeat again here, or it'll look kind of funny. So I'll go over it here and maybe replace some of it. And again, Photoshop does a pretty good job of blending the edges. So again, I used the clone stamp to improve the composition. The trunk is in front of the pole, which really emphasizes the elephant, which is certainly the focal point of the composition. And then I'll hit the X, and I'll hit don't save unless you want to save your elephant. Now, File, Open, Liquify. So yes, that's your professor, and we're going to give me a chin lift. And Liquify is its own entire environment with its own set of tools. If you go to Filter, Liquify. So now we're in the Liquify environment. And Liquify is its own environment with its own set of tools. And basically what it does is it moves pixels around like wet paint. So I'm not going to go over all of the tools in Liquify, but they're definitely worth experimenting with. So if I pick the pucker tool, for instance, and you can adjust the brush size over here. Then the pucker tool can make things smaller. You can pick the bloat tool, and I'll adjust the brush size again and make things larger. So you can have some pretty fun distortions messing with the pixels in the liquify environment. So that's not what I'm going to show you right now. Let's use the reconstruct tool. The reconstruct tool, the second tool there, that's important. Make it big, and not that big. And we can go over the parts that we want to repair. We decide we don't want to use the liquify on certain parts. You can use the reconstruct tool to go over them and put them back like they were. So let's use the forward warp tool. So the forward warp tool, when it's little, moves pixels around like this and makes things a little painter-like. So you could do that, but we don't want to do that. What we want is to make the brush really large. Not that large. That's pretty good. I have about 448, 450. So we want it large enough that we can grab the chin and pull it up a little bit, but not so large that we completely distort the face, and not so small that we're moving little parts of it like a paintbrush. So what we want to do is have a brush about this big, and we want to click and drag up. And again, we don't want to make the effect so drastic that it looks completely unnatural. That's pretty good, and I'll hit OK. So here's before and after. Instant chin lift. And before you decide to do this to all of your relatives or to yourself, remember there are characteristics in people that make them themselves. It's also worth noting when you see perfect celebrities in magazines that they've been heavily photoshopped. People routinely have their stomachs, their thighs, their chins retouched in Photoshop. So use liquify for good instead of evil. And remember, liquify tools can be used to move or change things in a composition. It's all about what works with the composition as a whole. And the Photoshop retouching tools are powerful tools to modify and improve your composition. I'll hit the X and don't save. So that concludes our instruction on Photoshop retouching tools. Remember, if it detracts from your composition, take it out. Now, go to our next instructional video.